Good Friday evening to you, South Dakota. I couldn't be happier to be with you. Unfortunately, it's virtually, but that's okay. Just excited to be part of it, even though still sitting right here in beautiful Idaho tonight. So, with you, we're going to talk a little bit about EMS disasters, but first, I want to recognize a couple of special people there in South Dakota. You know who you are, but we every Friday we wear a special color of something. And so normally on Fridays, we wear red to support our troops that are still deployed. But in October, we wear pink every Friday. So we have our pink shirts on today. So for those friends of mine in South Dakota that have been affected by breast cancer, we're thinking of you and we are supporting you. And we're in the midst of a fundraising campaign to increase the number of underprivileged people to get screened for breast cancer here in Kootenai County, Idaho. So excited to be with you tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about EMS disasters and what you need to know for an EMS disaster. And so I think, when you talk about MCIs and people talk about big events and people talk about you see it on the news and you think, oh, that happens to somebody else. But if you really look at it, it really can happen to anybody. And so I think we need to start working on getting people more ready. And you can't just say, oh, that's for the big departments to deal with. And it's interesting because I think everybody defines an MCI differently. And, a lot of people, even if you look at their MCI plans, will talk about a specific number of people. And what we've done and what I encourage everybody to do is really look at a definition of MCI that anything that exceeds the capacity of your immediate availability. And the reason I say that is because there's times that maybe you have, for instance, on a typical Friday afternoon, that's our busiest time of the week. From 2 to 7 p.m. is our busiest 5 hours of any week in our EMS system. So we could typically, if you picked a Tuesday morning at 4 a.m., that's about one of our slowest times. Well, we have 10 ambulances on duty. We have plenty of people to help. Our capacity to handle an MCI at that point in time is a lot greater than it is on Friday afternoon at 3:30. So I would encourage you to all think that EMS disasters, specifically MCIs, affect you all differently, and work within those parameters to know that even if you don't have an MCI truck, or you don't have 10 ambulances, or you don't have a trauma center, or any of those things, that certainly doesn't mean that an EMS disaster cannot happen to you. So and I'm going to spend a very short amount of time talking about this, but I think it's so important to remind you that really any good any good disaster period, it doesn't matter whether it's an EMS disaster or not, goes so much more smoothly when you use the incident command system. So ICS was created in the 1960s because of large wildfire events. And what you had is people who were all doing all doing good things, but weren't sharing information with each other. And so you actually had firefighters getting killed because you had different groups trying to achieve different goals at different times, and thus causing, with a lack of communication, causing problems. It's evolved over time to a quite mature system where several agencies, ours included, use it on every call that we go on. It has a focus on safety and accountability. It really talks about objectives. It manages people through a manageable span of control, and it provides an organized approach. And it really, truly should, if you use the incident command system, speed the delivery of resources and aid in the more rapid mitigation of any incident you have, because you're doing it through one channel and one source and one person or one system rather than multiple systems. And then, of course, after September 11th, we created NIMS and the National Incident Management System. And it's interesting because NIMS is absolutely the state law in most states. And I looked it up, and it is what you are going to use in South Dakota if you do have a disaster in South Dakota. Most local government bodies have adopted NIMS, and the system is very formal. I will tell you, the system for NIMS is an outstanding system for a really large scale disaster. You're talking about incidents of national significance, type 1 and type 2 incidents. But most of our MCIs are short-lived and are more like type 4 or type 5 incidents where you either handle it within your own county or your own jurisdiction's resources, or may have to call a little bit of mutual aid. But most MCIs don't last days or weeks or multiple operational periods. So while the National Incident Management System is certainly important and teaches some great basics, ICS is what we use every day. NIMS, what it does is provides a common terminology, common organizational structure. It manages the span of control. So remember, the span of control is 3 to 7 people reporting to you with an optimized number of 5. And you want to keep that span of control small, because the second you start expanding it beyond your capabilities to manage that span of control is the instant that people start freelancing and doing their own thing and and where you're going to end up having people get hurt, not accomplishing some of the tasks and objectives that you have. However, again, NIMS is universally taught and accepted, and it's provided a universal training system, some of which is online. So when you look at agencies that are very mature and large and have training people that can do this training or use it every day, it's easy to fall into place and be able to do that. It's a lot harder to do that, obviously, if you don't have the resources to teach it or people with experience in that. But there are, again, free online training resources at nims.gov. So this is just a quick slide to demonstrate of what level of NIMS and ICS you should have if you're going to be involved in incident command and running large incidents. This breaks it down a little bit differently, and this is actually our reference guide that we use. And you all can certainly steal this from me, and you'll. I know the South Dakota EMS Association is making this presentation available online, so you'll have this. The other thing I will do is I will provide the folks at South Dakota with my email address. Well, they have it, and I'm glad for anybody to email me. I'm glad to send you this in a document that you could reuse. This just is a quick reference guide because I think people get lost in when they start breaking up incidents into groups and divisions and units and strike teams and task forces. And we use that terminology, but they're usually at high acuity, low frequency events. And so, we use incident command all the time, uh, but we don't necessarily get very far down into breaking into sections, divisions, and groups very often. And so this is just a quick reference guide that we have so that no matter the incident, and this doesn't necessarily just have to be for a mass casualty incident, we use this. We most recently used it during some civil unrest that we had. As I can imagine, some of you are facing the same thing. We actually had the opposite. We had counter protesters to Antifa. Antifa showed up with about 15 people, and about 1,000 local people showed up with their AR-15s, and it was quite a show. But we had to prepare for the civil unrest, and so in that we created task forces and group leaders and broke it into divisions and groups and things. So this is just something that we use to jog people's memory. If you break it down into medical branch and you have everybody in groups under a medical branch at a really large incident, this is kind of what your organizational structure would look like. Again, if you broke it into divisions because it was growing larger, and remember, groups is a function, divisions is typically a geographic location, whether it's North Division, South Division, or if you're in a high-rise building, Division 1 is the first floor, division going up. So just these are just some examples again. And the reason we do this is because, again, they're low frequency events. And so although we hope all of our incident commanders know these things, this isn't something you use every day. And so if you don't use it every day, it's not something on the tip of your tongue. So we have all of these job action sheets in every incident command kit, just so that if you are the first person on scene and you find yourself with 15 or 20 patients, you can easily start putting some of these things in place. Oh, I'm sorry. Whoop, whoop, whoop. So NIMS, again, the beauty of it is that the guides are available for everybody. I believe everybody in leadership should have some guides and know, because one of the worst things you can do in any disaster plan is preemptively decide who is going to fill that role. Well, that's the chief's job. Well, that works well until the chief is out pheasant hunting or elk hunting or on a tropical vacation, which of course no one this year can do. So maybe the chief is around all the time this year. But in a typical year, everybody needs time off. So rather than naming people or just putting them in one spot, I really believe that everybody in leadership should have these guides and have spares so you can handle out. You know, do some preset forms, be familiar and practice with them. It's interesting because, and I am not a millennial, nor do I. Ellie and Margaret and Amy, who have been working with me diligently on putting together my presentations for this, will attest to the fact that I am about as untechnologically savvy as anybody they've ever met, with perhaps the exception of Bill Justice, and he's one of my best friends, so I can say that, but he may be less technologically savvy than me. But that's one person out of all of you. And I also have found out that in the middle of a disaster, I can never rely on having internet access or having my computer work just like I should. So having a good pen and paper and a legal pad and some of these pre-printed forms is absolutely essential. So then the federal government has resources again, and I told you wrong a minute ago. I said it was NIMS.gov. It's FEMA.gov, and you search NIMS, and all of the classes, the forms come up. You can pre-print them. You can find fillable forms and put them on a flash drive if you want. All of those resources are available to you. So now I want to talk. Okay, that's NIMS, that's ICS. It's important. Use it, please. Now I really want to get into the differences between a widespread event and an isolated event. And in a widespread event, the org chart expands quickly. So when you look at what types of events cause a widespread event, well, certainly weather-related events like a tornado that has not only is it a mile or 2 miles wide, but it's, in some cases 20 miles long. So you have a lot of different areas. Whereas if you look at if you looked at a school bus accident, it may have 30 patients, but all of the patients are in one spot. So in a widespread event, your org chart expands much more quickly and greatly. You have branches. Again, you may look at geographical versus functional branches. You may have multiple casualty collection points. So the idea of one triage area or one treatment area may be very unrealistic because the incident is so spread out and you don't have that ability to do that. You want to look at your transportation and your medical communication issues. It's a much bigger challenge. Again, in a isolated event, you can have all of your transport resources come to one staging area. You can do, one person is then splitting people up and deciding which hospitals they go to. In a widespread event, you're competing for hospitals. I think a lot of you heard me talk about Joplin and my experience in the Joplin tornado last year. And one of our biggest challenges throughout that event was the fact that we had multiple casualty collection points all trying to compete for the same availability on hospitals until we stepped in and made a hard stop on that and said, okay, this casualty collection point, you're using these 3 hospitals. This casualty collection point, you're using these 2 hospitals. This casualty collection point, you're using the airport as a landing zone. And so you've got to think about splitting that up. Oftentimes in a widespread event, the hospital becomes its own branch because patients self-report to the hospital. If they don't get in a widespread event, if people don't get help pretty quickly, they're going to find a ride to the hospital and self-report to the hospital. The problem is, and it's no different in South Dakota than it is in Idaho or that it wasn't when I lived in Kansas, and that is that a lot of our hospitals, in fact, the majority of our hospitals are critical access small community hospitals, not set up to handle massive major trauma patients, or certainly not multiple massive major trauma patients. And in my experience in disasters, some of the sickest patients that we've found that have come into the system are patients that absolutely were found initially at a critical access hospital needing to be transported to a trauma center somehow. And then you're going to obviously have to get EMS into functional groups as well. And that's going to be challenging and difficult because, again, the widespread event is much, much harder to manage. An isolated event is just much less challenging because all the patients are in one spot. Branches can be functions. You may just have a medical branch, or even if it's not a big event, you could have a medical group and then split off triage, treatment, transport. It's easier to divide up the patients from the scene because you know exactly how many patients there are. You know exactly what hospitals can take if you're doing your medical communications correctly. It's much less challenging from a less challenging from a resource management standpoint. If you're controlling the patient flow and you're controlling the patients and where they're going and where they're coming from and how they're going and how they're getting there, then it's much less likely that your hospital is going to become overrun with self-reporting patients. And keep in mind, and this is a challenge and this is a discussion, and I've had this, in fact, I'll just say I've had this argument with a lot of people throughout my career, and people want to get into the discussion about whether or not um, you take everybody to one hospital. I'm a big advocate that you never take all your patients to one hospital because all you're doing is moving the disaster to the hospital. So I'm a big advocate, even if it's a little bit longer transport times. Every study that has ever looked at this will show you that if you split patients from the scene, they still get to definitive care more quickly than if you take all the patients to one hospital. So in an isolated event, if you manage that from the scene, it's a lot less likely that that the hospital becomes their own MCI. And then again, you use groups rather than divisions much more frequently in an isolated event because you just don't have the geographic spread. So I want to talk a little bit about the medical branch person, and whether you call, depending on the size of the incident, it may be the medical branch director, it may be the group supervisor, the division supervisor. Some people still use the terminology sector. I'm not a big sector user, but I don't want to dismiss that as that's what some people's systems allow. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what makes a good medical branch director. So it's got to be somebody that has the ability to communicate and has the not only the skills to communicate, but the tools to communicate. I'm a big advocate. So again, this is a low frequency event. So you're not doing this very often. It's high acuity because if you have 20 patients, there's a likelihood that several of them are critical or code red patients. It's also a likelihood that this is going to be an event where you may not, well, although you may not be an agency that normally uses mutual aid, now all of a sudden you're going to be in mutual aid. And so if you came to my scene and I said, well, go talk to Tim over there, none of you would know who Tim was. However, if I said, go talk to the guy who's wearing a vest that says medical, all of you would be able to pick that up. So we really, really, really believe in identifying with a vest. In fact, we had vest kits made. I'll talk a little bit about this um, when we get to the tools, but we actually had a vest kit made with vests with each of the titles in our MCI plan. What that does, two things. That does the identification, but it also reminds the incident commander when he opens his MCI kit, oh, it says here it says here there's a triage vest. Maybe I should have a triage officer. It says here I need med comms. Whoop, better have a med comms person. This person needs to be accessible to all his groups and division supervisors that he appoints. And unless safety is done some other way, the safety of the people operating in his branch or his groups and divisions is his responsibility. I absolutely am a big believer in that the incident commander or a branch or director or supervisor or cannot be doing the hands-on stuff. They've got to be stepping back because you missed something. The second you get in and involved in one of the skills associated is when you get tunnel vision and you lose your ability to function and focus on the rest of the incident. You start focusing on one thing. So you got to have a view of the scene. I also am a big believer, and I've switched this. I used to be a big believer in field operations and kind of a mobile command post or whatever. I'm a big believer now, and I park my SUV wherever, and I have the best view of as many sides of the scene as I can, and I roll up the windows and I'm in there, and I've got talented people to go do the stuff. I've taught people how to be triage and treatment and transport and med comms and all of those things. If I'm finding myself in the role of the IC or the medical branch director, I find that I can't get the second I get involved is the second I lose control. So I'm a and I do this on the fire side too. If I'm in command, we adhere very strongly to the idea of a fixed command post. or, for those of you that are familiar with blue card tech terminology, the strategic command post. So, some things that you need to be if you're going to be the guy or gal that's in charge of medical, you need to be assertive, decisive, objective, calm, quick thinking, adaptable and flexible, experienced. So, and experience does not mean that you need to be the highest level medical provider on scene. It needs to be that you have the most decision making experience on scene. So I would argue, and I've been a paramedic for 26 and a half, almost 27 years. And I would argue that I don't think paramedics make better medical officers or medical group supervisors than other people. I think it's people that have dedicated themselves to learning the craft. And oftentimes paramedics get tunnel vision. You put them in treatment where they're really skilled, have them transporting patients. But I am not a believer that it needs to be a paramedic to do this. Realistic and capable of delegation. But once you give somebody a role, you've got to then let them go do it. If I give somebody the role of triage, I'm the medical guy, and I give somebody the role of triage, then what I need to do is step back and let them run the triage area. And so it's just hugely important that we do that. So just some things that you got to keep in mind. You need to make sure that you've got safety covered. You have to identify, again, whether it's a vest or however you identify it in your EMS system. Scene size up is important. You've got to start getting a grasp on number of patients and begin to determine resources. This is especially important when you rely on mutual aid, because so I can tell you that anything more than 12 to 15 patients is outside of my system's scope without calling some additional help, or at least doing some backfill or something like that, just because of our on duty staffing and our other normal calls. So that's why it's so important to start getting a number of patients and begin to order resources earlier. And then you start looking at your areas that you're going to need staging, triage, treatment, transport, med comms, and start staffing those as you have people, qualified people to do that. Identify communication resources. Again, call additional operational resources. And I don't pretend to tell anybody. It's interesting. I'm always willing to share our MCI plan, but I will only do it in a PDF version. And the reason I only do it in a PDF version is because I don't want anybody. I want you, in writing your MCI plan, to be realistic about it and add the resources that are realistic to your world. So if my plan calls for using our 10 on-duty ambulances, and we have 17 ambulances in the county, and our 5 helicopters that we have within 30 minutes of us, and our level 2 trauma center and those sort of things, I'm doing that based on my system, and that's unrealistic for other people. So I always tell you, you got to make sure that you have the ability to actually utilize those resources. You've got to provide accountability to the incident commander if you're not the IC, and for your people that are out there working, and the patients. So let's talk about EMS staging real quickly. Again, staging, I think, is probably one of the underutilized things, and I think staging absolutely sets the tone of the incident. I think if you have a strong staging officer and a strong staging process, I think what that does is it really sets the tone of the incident. So you're going to identify staging. Again, the person who's the staging officer should wear a vest, and somehow you should mark it with a cone or a strobe or something. You need to consider scene proximity. I would always tell you, though, if you have a better surface or a bigger surface or a better staging area, another block or two down the road, I'd always go that extra block or two than just putting it so close. And you have to start addressing all of these things. Access and egress. You can't cause a bottleneck with your flow of traffic. Your size and your surface. I'd take a parking lot over a field any day. And so many of our events are weather related events. So what do we do when we have, if it's the middle of a tornado and you put everybody in a field, and in an hour the rain comes and now everybody's stuck? You haven't done anything. Now you've got a disaster within a disaster. So I always try, when I do a staging area, I try to separate ambulances and fire trucks. And the reason is, what do fire trucks bring to a disaster? They bring tools and people. What do ambulances do at an MCI? They transport patients. And in fact, I take my crews off my engines and my ladders and my rescues, and they're my officers, they're my triage and treatment, and they're using their backboards and their equipment and to do those things. And I really want to keep my ambulances ready to transport and just focus on using them to transport. And that's the only thing I do with my ambulances, other than probably your first and maybe your second due ambulance. Short of that, the rest of them are all there to transport patients, and that's all they're going to do. So you want to avoid, getting them trapped in by other things. And then you got to start looking at threats. Do you have if you're at a hazmat, is your staging area upwind or downwind, or is the wind shifting? And if it shifts, what's your plan to move staging? Or can you, do you move staging a little bit further back so that you aren't ever in the hazard no matter what happens? You got to look at weather. Now, of course, obviously with some of the civil unrest, and that's, I think, the PC term we're using this week is civil unrest. We don't call it rioting anymore. But the civil unrest, you have to make sure your staging area is secure and that you keep your people and your equipment safe and secure during their staging. You want to identify how you're going to communicate. So some incident commanders, and this is really up to the incident commander. So I would just, it's challenging. I'm a big believer in the idea at an MCI that the transport officer would communicate directly to staging for more ambulances. However, the staging officer would then, if I'm the incident commander, communicate with me to order more resources from dispatch. But you just have to identify your communications plan, communicate with operations and transport, establish accountability. Again, this to me is where an incident really begins, and you set the tone for how you're going to run your incident, because you're going to establish accountability. You're going to take a personal accountability report. You're going to write the unit number down. You're going to take the crew identification. So you need to get the members' names in there. And then again, with ambulances, I have the crews remain with the ambulances as often as they can. And then, the little things that you got to deal with staging: coordinate traffic control, have law enforcement help, record units, level of care. This used to be a lot bigger deal. And, they used to say, oh, well, I want 10 ALS ambulances or 10 BLS ambulances. You know what? I'm to the point now, I just want ambulances. And if you can convince me that the station wagon with a spine board in the back is an ambulance, I'll probably use it. And so I don't know that levels of care matter. Obviously, you want to match sicker patients with ALS units and not critical patients with BLS. But if all I had was 20 BLS ambulances and I had 20 critical patients, and that was the best I could do, by God, I'd do it, and I'd transport all those patients, and we'd make it work, and we'd take care of our patients. The other thing is, if I'm the staging officer, I review the go rules with the people that are in staging. So I say, okay, you're going to pull up to the treatment area. We want you to get out of we don't want the driver to get out of the ambulance. We want you to, the technician to get out of the ambulance, be ready to accept patients. But you can't cause a bottleneck further down the road and out of staging. So you want to make sure you've got those things taken care of. You want to distribute maps, guides, radios, whatever may happen, whatever the crews or the people in staging may need. Not so much at an MCI is that important, but for instance, when you do have a weather-related event, if you're going to be doing search and rescue or anything, maps are incredibly important, because if you tell a rescue company that, okay, I want you to go grid search this, or you send a task force or a strike team in to do that, but you don't give them a map and they're not familiar with your area, then having a map and some of those things in the staging area is really pretty crucial. Consider comfort and long staging events. So if you're going to have an event that's going to last, a long time, you've got to start thinking about bathrooms, food, and water. Consider cones and signs. Consider lighting for night operations. You might consider the need for multiple staging operations. So again, if it's a widespread event versus an isolated event, then you got to start thinking about that. You need to be wondering whether or not that you've got the ability to have multiple staging areas, because you may not even be able to get to some of the further destinations. The other piece is you you're going to have resources. If it's that large an event, you'll have resources coming from every direction. So you want to make sure that you get those locations picked and identify those to command as soon as possible. So just kind of this is just kind of a staging flow, and again, disciplined staging is so important. But they're going to flow out of staging to the scene to the hospital, and depending on how large your incident is, or how many trips you need a certain ambulance to make, as you may have them go to the hospital and then flow back to staging if you need them to. Triage, and boy, triage is probably one of the most controversial subjects you can teach or talk about during an incident, because everybody really has what kind of triage they like, and which system they're familiar with. So I'll only I'll talk about it briefly, but you will not hear me sell you on a certain system, or triage system, because I think there are multiple good ones, and I think you need to use the one that it best suits your system. So you need to ensure safety. Again, I want my triage officer, your triage supervisor, in a vest. I want to coordinate with the medical branch. And why am I doing that? Because as I get updates and number updates, then you know what, we're going to get those numbers into medical as soon as possible, so that they can be ordering the right number of resources. Again, system in use. Technically, I guess we use the START system, but we've even gone away a little bit from that, and we walk up and go, okay, if you can walk, move, you're either a green or a yellow, and we'll get to you shortly. If you can't walk, you're probably we know you're either a red or a yellow. And we just kind of go up and go, well, that one's really sick. They're a red. That one's sort of sick, but not really sick. So they're a yellow. Oh, they're not sick at all. They're green, or they're dead, and they're triage black. So we've simplified it. We do not, in our system, we went away from tagging patients initially. All we do is a piece of tape, and we put a triage fanny pack, tape roll fanny pack, in every apparatus in our system. It doesn't matter whether it's a battalion chief or any chief officer rig, an ambulance, any engine rescue ladder, anything, because we can assign anybody to be the triage officer. And so as we go through that, we do that, and we've decided that the initial triage is only to try to get an accurate count of patients and sort of begin the sorting process. We're going to re-triage them when they get to treatment, and all they're going to get at that point is a little strip of tape around their wrist or their ankle. You got to triage all patients. You want to make sure that you're going to need a lot of assistance, but these assistants are going to get done pretty quickly so that you can reassign them to another task. So again, once you get all your patients triaged and there's no more patients to triage, you can reassign them to treatment or carrying patients or whatever it is you're doing. Again, in our world, we ensure all patients are taped. You want a direct flow to treatment. So I look at this, and if I was in person with you right now, I'd have one of the things I always do with this presentation is I have a marker board out, and I kind of show what a big scene looks like. And I put dots all over, and those are my patients. And then I flow them into a small treatment area, and we do a cone, and a funnel. And we actually put cones out into a funnel, and that's how our patients flow into the treatment area, because that's where I want everybody re-triaged. So you need to make sure that once you triage people, you can kind of point the litter bearers and the treatment people to the red patients first. One big thing is, while you triage code black or dead, any scene is a crime scene until proven otherwise. So you never move dead patients. The only time you would ever move a dead patient is if it meant you had to move them to get to a live patient. Clearly you do so in that piece, but you triage them and leave them there. Again, re-triage the patients as soon as possible, and you want to record numbers. And it's important to do this over the radio, and I'll tell you why. Is because everybody's probably operating, all the EMS resources are probably operating on the same channel at that point. or same frequency, or talk group, or ops, whatever you call your cell, whatever system you're using. But there's something to be said when you hear 10 red patients, 5 yellow patients, 18 green patients. That should start triggering things in everybody's mind about what's going on. So again, then you report everybody's numbers to medical. I think triage is probably one of the worst things, one of the things we are worst at, because we let emotions get in the way of practicality. We do something about every other year, is we bring people in and do a triage activity with them, and we change the types of patient complaints all the time. And we'll put some babies out there, or a pregnant mother, and we'll either make them code green or code black. But because it's a 2-year-old, people are naturally drawn to just triage it red and run it right over to the treatment area, and it's either, it's got an obvious mortal wound, or again, they're triage green. But we let our emotions get in the way of doing the business of triage regularly. So this is just something, I think, that we underutilize it, and we under perform when we do it. So doesn't matter how you do it, whether it's by group, division, or sector. You do need to do it by the type of patient. Again, most people use a color coded system. If you use critical, non-critical, or immediate, delayed, and non-critical, whatever you want to do, you're going to need a lot of you need to give people direction on what you want them to do. If you're the triage group leader or supervisor, you absolutely need to tell people, here's what I want you to do. I want you to tag people on the left wrist. I want you to report back to me every 10 patients to let me know how many patients total we have. You're going to need some assistance, but again, utilize those people not on transport units if you can. Utilize people that then can be reassigned to do other things. Again, different people use different things. If your system uses tags because that's what you feel is most appropriate, then definitely use the system that people feel most comfortable with and is most widespread. I will tell you, we do tag people. Where we tag them is, again, at the mouth of treatment. When they get re-triaged is when they begin to, when they basically go through the accountability process, and that's where we tag the patient and begin to identify the patient. We start as soon as we get there with the first unit, and we stop. So, I mean, our first apparatus on scene, no matter what type of apparatus it is, one person assumes command and one person begins to go start triaging. And when we stop, is we don't stop until the last patient is triaged. I mean, I think a selection of an officer is important. Again, you shouldn't select somebody that's not familiar with the system, but it's incumbent that you get everybody involved in your system familiar with how to do triage. And again, I do not get in the argument. I think the simpler the better, but I find that when somebody tries to endorse a specific product, you naturally get pushback. And my idea is, I don't want you to push back. I want you to embrace the idea that we need to all be more prepared for an MCI. And so if you're more comfortable with one system or another, I want you to use the system you're comfortable with rather than taking my advice or learning what we do. I want you to do what works best for you and your system. The treatment area, and this is always interesting to talk about treatment, because I think that people naturally, when we have a one patient incident, and we learned the first night of EMT class, and I don't care where you took your EMT class, I guarantee you learned this, that it was all about the patient. But no one ever pulled us to the side and said, oh, by the way, and if you get 20 patients, you have a little bit less ability to treat the patient. So treatment is great, and all these things, again, you want to ensure safety, coordinate with medical, but you also now need to coordinate with triage. You need the information that they have coming into you, but as well, you need to be giving information to transport so that they can be getting ready to arrange for transport of your patients that you're doing treating. You may have to, you want them out of the hazmat zone, you want them out of the weather, you want good access and egress, you want size and surface that makes the most sense. One of my favorite activities is, if we were doing this in person and we could go outside, is I'd have people go out to a parking lot and I'd say, okay, I want you to take these 20 spine boards and set me up a treatment area. And then, naturally people go and they leave about I don't know, 12 to 18 inches in between each spine board. And I would tell you for if you're creating a red treatment area, the guideline that I've always used is you need to make one spine board equivalent to the space that it takes to have one parking space. Because by the time you put all the gear down and you have people walking around and you have people sitting at the head doing airway and doing all those things, you're going to not need that much space. The other thing that a lot of people talk about is what treatment should you provide? And I'm a big proponent of you provide BLS treatment. If you can do ALS treatment without mucking up the treatment area, then do so. But keep in mind, the end goal of an MCI is to transport everybody off the scene as quickly as possible. So you don't want to bog it down. I would never spend any time doing an ALS skill in a treatment area if there was a waiting ambulance. So you want to identify and communicate your location to medical branch. You want to re-triage on it on entry. So again, the second that the patient is coming from being triaged and is about to enter your treatment area is exactly when to I want you to re-triage that patient. I want you to and then shunt them to the appropriate area. If they're immediate or red, send them to the red. And obviously, I think my next slide talks about it. Retriage patients and treatment is necessary, assign supervisors, uh, liaison with medical direction. Although I, this is a controversial topic too. I have several good friends throughout my career who are physicians, and I've had a couple of them say, "Man, what do you need me to do in a disaster?" And I say, "I need you to go to the hospital." And they say, "Well, but you need my help." And I said, "Do you let me come into the OR and operate on patients?" And typically they say, "No, I haven't found one yet that actually says yes, I'll let you do that." And so I kind of say, "Well, I need you to go be ready for patients there because I'm actually pretty good at this part of it, and I'm not super good at cutting people open and doing surgery. So how about you go do your piece and I'll do my piece?" So that's medical direction is iffy. You want to direct patient flow, document is needed. Uh, so this is where I talk about proximity to injured. I'm telling to me, once you begin treating a patient, it is harder to move the patient through the system. So I tend to put my treatment area right next to my transport area. I'd rather walk a patient a little bit longer from being triaged over to a treatment area that's right next to transport than get them to transport and start doing, splinting and maybe an IV and maybe a BLS airway or whatever, and then have to take the patient to the transport area because you're still working on limited resources. So just consider that. Consider the logistical considerations. Consider the safety of the area, visibility and identification. We put in our treatment areas, we bought 25 MCI kits that are exactly alike. And again, each one of them has a vest. They're in our command vehicles in our county. Each one of them has a vest for each position. We have a red, yellow, and green tarp. We don't lay the patients on the tarp necessarily. The tarps are only, I think, 12 feet by 12 feet. So you could fit maybe two patients on them. The idea is just that I can take then when I have people that are untrained, I can say if they have a red tape on their wrist, they go to where the red tarp is, or the red cone is, or the red flag is. So resources are placed in priority areas. Obviously, you need to do immediate first and then assign people to delayed minor areas as you can. Consider equipment requirements early. Again, consider the organization of flow. This just kind of talks about a little bit, what I said earlier is a diagram of kind of you want triage to swing in, and somehow I need to get better with my art skills and I need to put my little cone, my little funnel there into the triage area. But that gentleman standing there with his uh, old style oxygen kit is where you're going to get re-triaged, and then obviously you're going to put the patient in the appropriate area, and then you're going to funnel them out to the transport area after that. This is just a little bit of a blow up, but obviously red patients you're going to need to spread out a little more as they're going to take more people and more resources to take care of. And then your yellow and your green can be a little bit smaller areas, or not necessarily smaller, but you can fit more people into the same area. Treatment supplies. So in the treatment area, again, I cannot advocate for doing a lot of ALS treatment unless you're just sitting around with a bunch of paramedics that don't have ambulances to put their patients in. Most often MCIs are traumatic events anyway, so you're focused on getting the patients to a definitive care location as quickly as possible. You want to make sure your resources are placed in priority areas. Again, order resources early. uh you plan for a distribution of supplies, although you may never get supplies. But where, again, remember what you have sitting in the treatment area. You have a bunch of vehicles that aren't being used to transport patients, and most of them have a medical kit on them of some sort, even if it's BLS supplies. So one of the things we do when we have engines, ladders, rescues, or battalion chiefs show up to the scene, and they're obviously going to be assigned something else, okay, bring your spine board and your medical equipment to the treatment area, and then go and then report to uh, triage, the triage supervisor for assignment, or the treatment supervisor. So restocking and infection control can become a problem. However, more now than ever, that stuff's important. So I want you to think about it, and I want you to keep that in mind. So transporting the patient. Again, you got to ensure safety, establish a loading area. To me, the quintessential treatment area is like a drive-through restaurant. I'm going to pull up, I'm going to place my order, I'm going to pull up to the window, I'm going to get my cheeseburger and French fries, and then I'm going to leave. Because if you sit there and eat your cheeseburger and French fries in line, the people behind you are going to get really ticked off and start honking. So to me, the transport area is exactly the same as a drive-through restaurant. You're going to pull up. Hopefully your transport officer is going to have an assignment for that crew. They're going to say, okay, I need you to take this patient with tag 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to St. Christopher's. Not that I'm a saint. However, I just want to make sure I don't offend any hospital that may or may not be listening. So you go to St. Christopher's Trauma Center with this code yellow and this code red patient, and then the transport officer does it. If you have special needs like a burn center, hyperbaric, but you guys again are a lot like us, and so in our world we don't have a burn center close by. So guess what? If we have 10 people burned, I'm taking them to the local trauma center, and then we'll split them up from there. Uh, it's funny because I've used this PowerPoint before, and I always laughed when I had the little infectious disease piece in there, and thought, oh, well, that'll never matter. And well, now everybody's an infectious disease hospital, and everybody's an infectious disease expert. So I probably don't need to tell you that in 2020, you should get out wearing a mask and a gown and gloves and eye goggles and things like that. So establish documentation. So this is a big one. Transport is where you're really going to document. So again, that person's been tagged. So whether or not you have a name on the patient or not, you now know that they're tag 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's going to stick with them throughout the system. So you need to now document that I sent tag 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to St. Christopher's in medic 11. And if you're using outside resources, now you need to identify which county or which agency they're from, because you may have 10 medic 11s. So just be thinking about that. Use forms to do that. These are, and you're going to hear me say this probably 5 more times, but high acuity, low frequency event. It is not wrong. No one should have to memorize this. Have a plan. We have pre-printed treatment forms so that if I'm the transport officer, I know that I need the time in, time out, the unit number and tag number, and the location where they went. Communicate with treatment. Again, figure out how many people how many patients you're receiving. Communicate, coordinate with hospitals, ensure treatment is aware of capacities, advise medical of benchmarks. So I'm going to talk to my medical group supervisor and say, the red treatment area is clear of all patients. Communicate with command, and then consider other transport. I will tell you, it's something I have been wildly successful with at MCIs is using other vehicles to transport code greens and even occasionally code yellows. And so whether they're not they're buses or military vehicles, passenger vans, we have a great relationship currently in our location with the public transit system because they are available 24 hours a day. So school buses are great until as long as it's Monday through Friday and it's September through May, and it's not after 3:30 or 4 o'clock. Otherwise, it's cumbersome. Our public transportation system runs 24 hours a day. Now they don't have 20 buses running 24 hours a day, but I could at least get one bus that could do something for me. So be thinking about that. Helicopters are great. The only thing is, oftentimes they can only take one patient. So I always send my air ambulances to the farthest away hospitals so that I can recover my ground ambulances quickly. So transport, when do you start? The other things I do is I appoint a hospital liaison to our local hospital. Your local hospital is your biggest resource. So they may say initially, so we're going to call them and we're going to say, how many reds, yellows, and greens can you take? And they tell me, okay, I can take 5 reds, 10 yellows, 10 greens. Perfect. Well, guess what? As they treat patients and as patients change and patients go to the OR or go to the ICU or get sewn up, that changes. Having a hospital liaison absolutely makes a big difference for that, because what that does for me is that tells me what the latest is. Okay, 3 of my reds went to surgery. They may be able to take another 3 reds. Uh, the hospital liaison can also take care of if you do have to transport patients out of the hospital to a tertiary care center. They can often act as that liaison in that piece. Direct routes, keep time on scene limited, communicate, communicate, communicate. Retriage is necessary. Convey special situations to the receiving hospitals. And I would tell you, so all those questions in red on the right of the screen, if you're the or the transport officer, you've got to be able to answer that. Who's still here? Who went where did they go? And how many went anywhere? I need to be able to figure out how many of those patients went to St. Christopher's and what triage codes they were and where and who took them. Litter teams. So again, this is where I employ people that aren't trained. Red tag goes to a red flag. Yellow tag goes to a yellow flag. Do they have other things that they can do? And you can employ a lot of people to, I can get cops to do this. I can get bystanders to do this. I can get firefighters who aren't medically trained to do this. So I just, you know, and I can make anything a spine board. I can take doors. I can make pieces of wood spine boards. You just got to know how to move people and where to move them and how quickly to do it. I want to touch quickly on medical communications. So we all know that anybody that has done an after action review or looked at an after action review of a disaster knows absolutely that communication or lack of communication is the #1 failure to disaster. Pre-plan your communications, have good, reliable communications, consider how you're going to communicate with your mutual aid partners. Medical communications can greatly increase operational efficiency. So I think a lot of people have in their plans that uh, the hospital will do your medical communications and talk to other hospitals for you and figure out who can take what. And then you go and you figure out that they have no idea that that's in their job description. I love having that ability on scene of contacting my area hospitals and saying, how many can you take? How many reds, yellows, and greens can you take? The medical communications person truly becomes the air traffic controller of the scene. And it really aids the plan for communicating throughout the medical branch. So if you have enough people, I would tell you to really invest in the resource of having somebody be the med comms person in your disaster. So we're going to start winding this down here. What type of event do you have? What, is it a hazmat? Is it is it a mass shooting? Is it a weather related event? What type of damage are you dealing with? What is the potential affected population? So if it is a widespread weather event, I mean, is it in a residential area with a lot of apartment buildings or maybe skilled nursing facilities or something where you're going to see a patient count go dramatically up? So try to get a grasp on the scope, begin to document resources or begin to document everything and order resources very, very early. Hi, I'm from the government. I'm here to help. We've all heard that before. But keep in mind, all disasters are local. You are going to own this disaster from the start, and you're going to see it through the end. You may have help. You may have regional help. You may have state help. You may even have federal help if your disaster is big enough. But all disasters are local. So you have to be prepared to see this from the start to the end. You've got to build relationships, because if you don't have relationships with your neighbors, with your partners, when I joke every time I teach command to anybody, it's the ice cream social effect. You better get everybody together for a scoop of ice cream in an afternoon, and you better get to know the fire chief and the police chief and the EMS chief and the emergency manager and the dispatch director and all those people. Because if you wait till a tornado hits your town, or you wait till downtown's burning at 3 a.m., or you wait till the school bus rolls over on the county road to get together with all those people and figure out how you're going to manage this, you are behind the eight ball. You need to think about your mutual aid and have a plan for how you're going to contact them and where they're going to come and how they're going to do it. They need to have a grasp of how you run your scenes and what your plan calls for. You need to have those contacts. And I would tell you, never be afraid to declare a local disaster. What declaring a local disaster, it's not about funding. Funding happens later on. That's all decided by people way more important and bigger than we are. The ability to declare a local disaster frees up resources and kind of frees you up to break the rules. On an average day, I can't transport patients in uh, pickup trucks and school buses. They're not licensed transport vehicles. The second I declare a disaster, I can ask for forgiveness rather than permission. I can start transporting in anything that looks somewhat like it might transport a patient. So declaring a local disaster is important. Tools, good communications. We've beat communications up. I don't think I need to talk about that anymore. Build tactical worksheets. Again, high frequency or low frequency, high acuity event. No one memorizes this stuff. Pull the worksheet out, sit in your command buggy, and do this as the incident commander. Get your vest, your pens and papers, job descriptions. The other thing that's tucked in each one of our vests is a quick 3 or 4 bullet point job description. If I give you the triage vest, here's the things you're supposed to do as a triage officer: cones, lights, tarps, resources, lists, maps. Everybody needs to be familiar with basic equipment, and every apparatus should have basic equipment on it. So again, have a fanny pack with some triage stuff on it. Have a vest. Whatever system you use, there should be a basic equipment on every vehicle, and keep minimal amounts of extra equipment. No one should have enough equipment to manage if a 747 crashes. You're not going to do that alone, and know that everybody's going to be able to bring help. So manage your resources very carefully. You got to have some disaster equipment, or at least know where it is. So if I would know where an MCI trailer is. I'd know where there's a cache of extra radios or a command post, because if you find yourself in need of that and needing to use it, you've got to know where to get it and how to get it and what to do once it gets there and how to use the equipment. So this is it. Important takeaways. Again, every disaster is local. Low frequency, high acuity. You got to practice, practice, practice. You got to make sure that you're good at this, because you may go your entire career and never have one, but you may have one next Tuesday. And if you're not practiced and ready, then you're going to get behind the eight ball quickly. An MCI is defined by you. It's basically, the definition is it exceeds the local capacity at the time of the incident. Not, oh, well, we don't declare it an MCI till it's 15 people or 20 people or any of that. Build relationships. You got to have basic tools on every truck. You got to have a plan, and you got to train your people, and you got to take care of your people. So I know we're going to ask some questions through Zoom. If you have any concerns, I'd love to hear from you. Again, we'll get my email address to everybody. If you'd like a copy of our plan, I'm glad to share our plan. I'm passionate about MCI. I'm passionate about disasters, and I'm passionate about it because the first one I ever went to was such a cluster that I said, oh my God, if I'm ever in charge of one of those, I hope no one ever says that about me. So I'm going to close with this. Be prepared, get ready. and I hope everything goes okay. You guys have a great day, and thank you so much, and take care of yourselves.